I mean, I've been on a few different projects where that's kind of the case, where it's like starting to go really off the rails, and it ends up going red, and the focus seems to be heavily on like, let's get this back to green, but there almost never seems to be that discussion. I mean, even myself, I don't even think to bring it up sometimes. It's like, well, maybe this project should just stop. Like, you know, there's that whole like sunk cost fallacy of like, well, we put all this effort into it, but it's like, yeah, but at this point, should we be asking the question, should this even continue? I don't think that gets asked very often, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I think we just have, as humans, we always try to like see things through that movie, that closing, the happy ending, and trying to see the succession of these projects. But oftentimes it might be just a smarter move to like, okay, this is, you know, fail hard and fast and get on to the next thing, and what did you learn, and do better the next time.
Because sometimes you don't have that option.
Yeah.
Because the leadership wants you for the project to be live, and they don't accept to close it. So how much authority do you have to be able to say, okay, we have to close it because it's costing too much, and or maybe the project could expire. So let's say there are some projects with a multi-million dollars that are going over several years. So when you started, when the need of that product or whatever was developed, 3-4 years later, maybe all the competitors move on, and so what you started is no longer needed. So would you then still go ahead and launch it, knowing that you are past of the deadline? Maybe that would be good to close it then. Yeah. To just call it quits.
Question for everyone else here: do any of you build any like fail safes when you like do a statement of work or a charter? Or do you write anything? Hey, this is the point of no return on a project, but you put something in there because I think that would make that discussion easier. If it's a multi-million-dollar project and you're like, okay, we get into this point, we're still okay to close it. Well, where is that point of no return? I don't personally. Davenport doesn't do any of that. Although I think it would be beneficial to have something in there, because then it makes that discussion very easier. Just know when is it to come back to it, and it's okay, we're at that point.
And your sponsor's signing off on the charter to agree that you have that.
This is a mutual. We've already had that discussion. Because otherwise, then they're going to push you to get through. And I get sometimes you don't have that control. There might be like a law or something in place where this has to happen. It might not be going well, but we still need to move forward with it. So
I know we're looking at putting in like I think it was like a benefit realization kind of metric. So the business would have to have that all defined before the project's initiated. But some of that stuff, it's a little harder to tie in if the realization is going to be 6 months, 6 years, or whatever after the project. But we are trying to tie it to the project a little bit so that you have that awareness of like, oh, we're changing the scope or we're changing the schedule. How does that impact the business realization? And I think if that goes negative, then that really does facilitate that discussion of, well, maybe this project just needs to stop because we're not going to realize any benefit from it if we keep going. So.
Do you do a risk register when you're starting a project?
Yes. Usually capture like risk assumptions and right off the front. But I think the business realization is it's been a little nebulous. They're still trying to like boot it up, but it's because it's something we want the business to own, and it's going to be more around kind of the long-term benefits of that work getting done. But so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays in.
So who do you think has the authority to call it closing project versus still moving on? Would that be a business, or would that be a project manager or program manager? Who do you think should be the one that calls it quits?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's probably the sponsor because they're tied to the business, and I think that's where I struggle a lot. Like, I mean, as a PM, I think maybe it's the responsibility to bring that topic up and just say, this is what it would look like if we canceled it. Maybe that's a good idea because this is what it looks like if we continue. And even just saying, like, if we continue, you're not going to have resources for XYZ project that are supposed to kick off after this one.
I was going to say, to me, what is the reason the project it fails really, or like why you're having difficulty, a lot of times it's resources because there's 17 million projects going on at the same time that all use the same people. And so I think that really the ownership comes back to that leadership team, whoever's that portfolio management, whoever is saying we're starting XYZ projects, they need to be the ones that are helping to manage those resources. But I do think there's responsibility on the project manager side to bring the flush up problems to the forefront and say, hey, we're not meeting our target, or we're not meeting these things, so that we can have those discussions at that level.
And I think we do, like, I know I do the status reports and stuff, and I think they should have some idea of something coming. If things aren't going right, they should have an understanding, like, hey, this is seeing a lot of things past dates, not things being completed, or maybe something that we're seeing that the benefits aren't really there anymore. So I think they should even know before you came to them that this is going off the rails a little bit.
So does anybody ever had a project in the past that you guys got surprised with the closing of the project because there were no indicators that it was going bad, or maybe the project manager, again, your friend, was not bringing it up? Everything was green and yellow, and then suddenly he got to the point there is no other way around it, and you have to close it.
Yeah.
But he was not, or she was not, indicating or telling anybody that's going bad because they maybe thought it gets the project status reflects on them, so they didn't want to bring it up. Have you ever had it happen?
I actually do have an honest friend. But it wasn't that he didn't share anything, but it was in the 11th hour where a project actually just got killed day of going live, and it really wasn't the project manager's fault. He had been talking for months in these meetings about, hey, we're going to do this, but it's going to have this one problem with the feature. And I don't know if that sponsor just wasn't listening, didn't want to hear it, and move forward. And then when it comes to go live, like, hey, everything's there except that one thing we told you wouldn't have. And all of a sudden it was a deal breaker. And I felt so bad for him because, he did the due diligence. Everyone knew about it. Everyone in those meetings knew about it. But that is one time where it just caught everyone by surprise. Like, hey, we told you going into this that this wasn't going to happen. So. But I haven't had anyone with a PM not being transparent and just not showing. I mean, there's a point, I feel like, where you want to be informative and being transparent, but there's also a time where you try to solve your own issues before you concern them with that, because it could be something that could be easily resolved. But if you're coming every 2 days with something new, then it's like they're managing the project versus you're managing the project. So.
A question, and this is kind of one of the things that probably I just take on myself. So I would feel, in me getting into the business or what have you, being new, that like if the project wasn't successful, that I was a failure because they're counting on me to be the project manager to run it. So it kind of is similar to that, because you have to go to whomever, the executives, and say, hey, this isn't working, or we should close it down, or what have you. I realize that that's a thing you have to do, but I would wonder what the reflection would be back on me as a project manager. Like, she doesn't know how to do her job, or what have you, so I don't know what the feedback is.
And I've seen it both ways. I think everything depends on the sponsor and your manager, because yes, somebody would say, oh, it's your fault.
Right.
We took the wrong project manager and so forth. But the key is to tell them the status, to be very transparent from the beginning. And if something is not going well, to call it out right away and get help.
And
yes,
I would say, and to piggyback off of Alex too, it's not just going to them and reporting things aren't going well. It's this isn't going well, and this is what we're doing about it.
Right.
But we're making like an awareness, so that awareness is always there, and you're building that accountability and that trust with your upper management and whoever it may be, the project sponsor, so that it's not you know, like they can see your skill set coming through because you're telling them all the things that you're doing.
Right.
to try and help this project move forward.
Right.
So it's more communication
I'm
component.
pretty transparent, so I probably almost have to
Back it off a little
back
bit.
out a little bit.
Yeah, because you don't
I
want
got
to be-
handle this fine,
Yeah.
no big deal, and the ones that I can handle.
And you don't want to overdo it. You know,
Yeah.
if you know that something is in yellow, you don't call it red right away.
Right.
So it has to be a balance. And maybe as a newbie, maybe you are kind of thrown all of the, less successful projects.
Right.
I'll say too, managing
depending on the
perceptions is a
managers.
big deal. So we often use the red, yellow, green, but being very clear about what that red, yellow, green means to you and your project specifically, because I know there are times when we report, I had this experience where we reported it yellow on an item, and we reported it yellow a couple of times, and it was like exactly on time, but there was like, if anything went awry, like there would be a straw that would break the camel's back kind of thing. So we kept it in yellow. Well, when their leadership of the area that was responsible for that found out that they're like, we've been in yellow 3 times, and they had some bad, so that team got reprimanded
Right.
unnecessarily because they were doing everything as expected, kind of thing. So I know that can cause a rift. So being very transparent about what you mean by red, yellow, green too can sometimes help to manage those perceptions.
Yeah. And I know I've seen some projects that they did like yellow/green or red/yellow.
Yeah.
So it's yellow, it's kind of red, but it's not really red.
Orange.
So it's like
You can start adding some shades
you
of
can
the
be
rainbow
very
in.
creative. I have never seen like 3 colors. I always saw like 2 colors merging. Interesting.
And when you start putting yellow in the status report, don't you have this is how we get back to green corrective
Yes.
Action.
plan?
Yep.
So, it's like, it still looks like if it's yellow, it can be corrected. If it's red, you look like we need some intervention here.
Yeah,
Somebody's
no,
got to
totally.
step up and provide clear direction or more money or something to get it back on track.
But I think that kind of a little bit of what you were saying, Philip, that for me and my other job, the expectations weren't very clear. So it's hard when you feel like you know what you're supposed to do, but you really, so if the expectations or what you're supposed to do on the project aren't defined, you're kind of guessing. So being very clear on their end with what they expect on the project, and then you have the accountability or know, where your lines are, to report and stuff. But yeah, that was my biggest issue with my last job, was just do it. Okay.
Well, they said do it. They didn't say, why is it not done yet? Sounds like a great place to work.
Because we kind of talked a little bit about that yellow, but when is that point when you really have to ask for forgiveness? I think it's as you do more and more projects, you start to get a better understanding of your sponsors and the people that you work with, and you start to accept those expectations, and you'll start to know, you're telling them too much and they don't want to know that much, or hey, this is something I'm really going to need their help with budget, or there is something that you have a plan B, but you need them to do that plan B. I need more people. I need more time. It's one of those things. Any things that you guys typically do? I think for me, it's just getting to know my sponsors and teams, knowing when my limitations are met and when to then ask for help or ask for, say, hey, this isn't going.
So again, help and forgiveness. I mean, those are the 2 little different
it's
things.
getting a little different there. It's like when you.
So do you ask for forgiveness when your status is in red, or do you ask for forgiveness if the deliverable is missed? Because you can have, 50 deliverables to launch the product.
Yeah.
2 of them are red. Do you already start asking for forgiveness then, or do you start asking when you don't hit the deadline?
I think corporate culture plays such a huge aspect in that, right? And that, to your point, understanding your people and your stakeholders, but you also have to understand the cultural norms of the organization and that looks like and when it is your responsibility for the project or when you are executing someone's project, right? Because I think that is the thing that I see or hear a lot talking to project managers in the field is my project, my project, my project. And what I am learning, I am not fully transparent, not a project manager,
Yeah.
right? What I hear sometimes is like, but is that your project or are you driving someone else's project, right? Like, I think that's an interesting thing to think about and have that mindset as you're thinking about, am I truly asking for forgiveness because I have done something in error or intentionally or unintentionally to do this? Or is the person that's project this really isn't doing it, right?
Yeah, that's a good point because I feel like when I just to kind of think about my own feelings on the project and like that point of like feeling like I need to ask for forgiveness versus feeling like there's just something wrong,
Right.
and I need to like, I mean, there are times when a project may be really off the rails, but you're like, well, I know why it's off the rails. I know what we need to do. I need to document these issues. We need to set up these meetings, and you're just kind of going through it, even though
Right.
it's maybe red or yellow. But then there are other times where it's like, I feel like I really dropped the ball on these things, and I just need to say, sorry, I missed this. And I think trying to figure out where that point right now, for me at least, is just kind of a gut feeling. And I think I find out too, where it's times where my perception of it was just off.
Yeah.
It's like, sorry, I didn't set up these meetings. And they're like, well, we weren't expecting that.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh.
Well, I think our work is so deeply personal to people, right? And so it's very challenging, I would imagine, to run a project or initiative or be responsible and judged on that from a career perspective when the interest from the person who that was given to you, right, is waning or not there, right? Maybe you've been handed projects 6, 7, and 8 on their list, and it's 1, 2, and 3 to you, but it's 6, 7, and 8 to them. And so at what point do you try to separate yourself and your success from the lack of engagement from the stakeholder, right? And without it sounding like sour grapes, like, well, he didn't do what he said he was going to do, or she didn't get me what I needed to when without it sounding sour grapes. That's the part I think is super interesting about the whole project management field, is that becomes deeply personal to you when for somebody else it might be like, oh, I did ask you to do that. Oh my gosh, I totally forgot. And you're like, what? Right? Like, I think that is like an interesting dichotomy of the field that is not true in a lot of other, like my boss would never forget that she asked me to go sell something. Right? Like, that is what we do here, right? But I think that's an interesting dichotomy of the profession for sure.
It does make a huge difference if you have your executive sponsor engaged.
Yeah.
And if you don't, it's night and day.
Yeah.
And when you've got that person and you've got that support and their interest, and you've got somebody, it's a collaborative effort. You don't feel all alone.
I just have always been very impressed because if someone doesn't care about something that I'm doing, I'm not apt to do it.
Right.
So, but in that project management field, you guys are so good at just, hey, I'm going to do this because this is what I was tasked with, and this is deeply personal to me. And I'm like, if no one else cares, why is doing this, right? Like, I would probably not be a great sponsor if I wasn't passionate about it, right? So I think that's something interesting to think about. Is to sometimes pick your head up from, hey, is this about me and me in this project, or is this about, like, because if they don't care, it shouldn't hurt to ask, say, like, hey, do you want to do this anymore?
Yeah.
So if you don't, like, I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Right? But
Yeah,
that's tough to do when we're grinding on it.
Because I had a project that just went like really successful and one that's red. And it's like the one that was really successful, it's like the sponsors like coming to the meetings.
Yeah,
they're really
right.
excited,
Weird.
They're getting
Right.
everything
Yeah.
amped up. And then the one that's red, you know, the sponsor moved on and a new person picked it up and they're kind of like,
Who cares?
Why are we doing this again?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, you tell me.
Right? Like, this isn't my thing. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I think you're right. Just that engagement from the sponsor can really play an effect into that. But then also, it's like even the red ones, you're kind of like, well, my name's on this project.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
like,
And I think that's the hardest part about it, right? Is separating yourself from the project.
Right.
Because you could do everything right, but if it's not something people care about anymore, that doesn't mean they don't care about you. Maybe it does. In my experience, that doesn't mean they don't care about you or your success, but chances are they probably haven't really thought about you in that scenario, and that's hard to get around. So if you can make that of a less personal discussion and make it or make it a more personal discussion too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Hey, like, I feel like this is where we're at on this and this is deeply personal to me, but if it's not to you, then to your point, whose job is that to pull the plug?
And I wonder, Philip, what you were saying. So let's say you have the money, because apparently in order for you to continue with the project that's red, you have to have the money. And sometimes, sponsors change and so forth. So can you, as a project manager, try to push it to get it out of the red? Because you have budget for it, yes? Your project is still on.
yeah, I mean,
Even though the sponsors change, but the budget is there. So theoretically, the company wants the project to
yeah, I
be
think
launched.
The problem was like, I mean, the budget was fine. Everything, it was like 2 weeks to the go live. They found a data integrity issue. Then it's like another department has to spend 6 months fixing that.
God.
So it's like, and they haven't been invested in the project. So it's like, how do you get these people that weren't part of the project initially to spend 6 months fixing something for your project? And that's
Yeah.
where it kind of went off the rails. And with the new sponsor not being that passionate about it, I don't think they're able to really motivate that other group to
Are
do that
those
for them.
resources available?
Well, now it's, I mean, probably 2 months after when it was supposed to go live. So yeah,
Right.
we're running, like the resources that were on the project have moved on.
Yeah.
So even if they did get this fixed and tried to go back to the go live, like there's just all kinds of problems. It's at that point where it's just like, what do you call it? Like it's, I don't think
Well,
we're gonna
and
get across the finish
that
line.
that changes your, you used a fancy word, I don't remember because I didn't write it down, your business return on
Oh, the
investment or
benefit realization?
the benefit realization. Do unknown things coming up there, is that a point you can use? Hey, is our benefit realization, we have to understand that this changes
Yeah.
by this, and so if that decreases our benefit realization to a threshold
Yeah.
point, then
Yeah, because I think it's a
Yeah.
harder discussion at the sponsor level.
Right.
Because it's, the original benefits realization was around, oh, we get this software for free because we did this other agreement.
yeah,
And so let's implement this free software.
Yeah.
And now it's, well, how much are we going to
now
spend
it's going
implementing
to
this free
implement
software?
free software, right?
Yeah.
So I think that, like, you kind of have to mix that
It's always fun when they get
Fact.
deals, isn't it?
in there, right? Like, I
Always
think.
results in us doing something.
Yeah, right. You know, there's, I mean, we should know that about life, right? Like, there's no such thing. Yeah.
Typically after like go live, we'll have a post launch, and then we find our issues, and then we'll either say, do we have the resources to do this or not? Is this something that's going to be a post launch issue moving forward? Like, so we'll close the project, and then it's on to that sponsor to, do you want to keep it open? If so, you need to make those things happen. You need to make those resources available. If they don't, they're cool living with that. This is the way it's going to be. We're going to kind of keep it half broken, or it's a half the product's out there, but that one feature we're going to have to come back to it next fiscal year. That'll be for them to plan. Is it going to be a future project, or is it, do I want to keep this one still alive? Because right now, if you don't have that engagement and that buy-in, you're wasting everybody's time in a way, because you need these resources. They're not helping. You have people just kind of sitting there, you're not adding value by just kind of leaving it as is on no man's land for a couple of months.
Yeah.
So.
And
Yeah.
here's another thing. You said all the other resources have moved on. Are you the only one still hanging out
Well, that's where
there?
I'm at now. Is essentially the EPMO is kind of stepping in and
Yeah.
saying, "Well, we need this PM resource back. What are you guys doing with this project?" So maybe that'll get some more traction.
Well, I think that's where the idealisticness, I know it has its faults, but that's where why people grab onto that agile approach so quickly is because you just get like the
It's the
spot
fail fast.
that you're in,
Yeah.
and then you can just be like, hey, if you don't put that in my backlog, or you're Mr. PO, Mr. Mrs. PO, you're grooming this backlog. If it's not there, this is not on me to drive this project. This is on
Yep.
you. And I think now, obviously, there's huge challenges and all of those things that kind of go into that. But idealistically, I think that's why people are so quick to grab onto the agile approach.
Yeah, I'm always a fan of that. I usually love to have a plan B because I hate to go to somebody and like I don't know what to do, and that has happened. If it's something especially technical, legal, I'm not a lawyer, so sometimes when I'm backed against the wall and I have no one on my team is a lawyer, we have someone that we outsource for our legal counsel, so those are the instances where I say, hey, I need you to go to those lawyers and ask them those questions. But I usually like to have a plan B, or at least work with my team. I say, hey, I know, I'm sorry, we messed up on this. We should have done this, but here's what we're doing. That's usually my approach. But what are some of the things that you guys would do? Do you guys come with some documents that show, hey, this guy hasn't attended meetings, here's my attendance chart, or, or is it...
Throw someone else under the
Yeah,
bus?
I'm just wondering what everyone else's approach is. I personally, even though sometimes I feel that it is maybe someone else's issue with a project, I always I never like to throw someone under the bus or burn bridges. I will say, hey, I should have realized this, or I could have done this to maybe so next time. That's how I always phrase it, but I never want to put anyone on the spot or anything like that. Even if it is that like sponsor or somebody that should have, hey, you took my budget away, and I'd be like, well, I could have, potentially next time put this at risk, and what did I learn? And that's usually what I like to show, even though it is something that could be completely out of my control.
I think this is funny because I think that's such a, like we talked about at the last lunch meeting, the
Yep.
West Michigan Nice
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
right? Like, I think there's a line of a way that you can hold people accountable without throwing them under the bus,
Blaming.
but also taking responsibility for things that aren't
Yep.
your fault, right? So but that also plays into a corporate culture piece that you
Right.
have to figure out, and how big that person that you're holding accountable, how much impact and
Yeah.
influence they have in the organization, right? So I think all of that there. I like what you said about coming with a plan B. I like when people come to me with, hey, this didn't work. This is where I'm struggling. Here's what I'm thinking about doing. Can you help me formulate that plan together? Because I think rather than saying like, this is what I'm doing instead, maybe it's a semantics
Yeah.
thing, right? But hey, here's what I'm thinking. Can you help me tweak this plan or give me some feedback on this plan? I think you're encouraging some buy-in there versus just saying like, I know we missed it the first time, but you know what, we're going to do it this way the second time, where maybe that forces some of the disengagement of that stakeholder
Yeah.
unintentionally. Maybe that's an unintentional
that.
consequence of stakeholder engagement. Like, they're not going to let me say anything about what I want to do with my project anyway, so why do I want to go to your meeting,
Yeah.
right? So I think it's in a little bit of the...
And it puts it on their radar. They're more engaged. They want to, what happened with that, versus, hey, missed that date. It's happening next week. Okay.
And I think that's part of the, like, that that also feeds into, because I don't always think stakeholder engagement is always on the stakeholder. I think we have to be very aware of how open we've allowed them to be, right? Or how much voice we've actually allowed them to give. And I think that can be sometimes where people have frustration with EPMO processes or documents or things like that, is by the time they've done all of the things that you've asked them to do for their project, I can't care anymore because you're letting me want me to do things your way. It doesn't seem like my project anymore.
Yeah.
How about if you have a project that is kind of falling into a yellow-red zone? As a project manager, you bring up what the good resolution would be, but nobody listens to you. And then they launch the project with a duct tape, and 6 months later, it's like, oh, that's the shiny idea. It's like, hello?
Yeah.
Didn't I bring it up 6 months ago? If you did that, then you would not have, and everybody wanted to launch it on this particular day. It had to be this day because there were like 4 times missed deliverable. But we launched it with a duct tape because it was like a plan C already, not even past plan B, plan C, just to get this done at the date. And then it kind of bites you in the butt. So how do you overcome people not listening to you?
Well, that's a good one. What's the answer?
Don't ask me.
Have you had it happen before on your projects that you are like, you know what this project needs, and you are trying to bring it up and tell everybody, and they just are with blindfolds? It's like, we're
That's why
going
I
our
think
way.
you guys take good notes. Take good notes, but then I do kind of think that goes back to the difference between it taking it personally as our success and being able to separate our success from the success of the project, because in that scenario, I actually think you look like a better project manager, right? Because you had identified this issue or this risk, you gave your recommendations, it's documented multiple times, it's also documented that we chose to do A, B, and C, it continues on your risk register, or whatever that thing's called, but I think that actually, but it's separating that personally from taking that personally, that, because trust me, no one likes to say I told you so more than me. Just not a thing. Weird. I knew that was going to happen. But I do think that that's where we struggle as individuals and being successful, is when do we separate, maybe we actually were successful in that scenario, and if people are coming at you at that particular point, then that's when you're having these discussions about, I brought this to the attention of the team. Here it is documented. Here are the times we've talked about it. Here are the resolutions. Here's what I'm kind of thinking for a plan, but I need your guys' input to help us get out of this, as opposed to.
I would say earlier on in my career, I was really in the first bucket there, where I was really like, hey, this is on me, this is how I look and everything else. But towards a little ways into it, a couple years, where I just, I started documenting. I'm like, I did my due diligence.
Right.
I gave them the tools. But ultimately, I'm not the expert. I'm not the one with the budget. It's their decision. It's their baby. They're going to own it because the project has an end. So they're going to be the ones that have this after we're done. So what they do with it is have to be something that they're okay with. So if they're okay with having these faults or these Band-Aids, that's on them. But I tried my best to show them, okay, we could do it without a Band-Aid. We could actually have a pristine, top-of-the-line product here. But what they chose with and what they were okay with is ultimately on them and the team. So
yeah, that's along those lines. I think just trying to. One thing I had a challenge with was taking the mindset away from myself that I'm making this decision or I need to make this decision. No, I need to figure out who needs to make that decision, and I need to be able to show them decision A looks like this if you go this route, decision B, and then when they do decide and they're like, well, why did this happen? Like, well, this is what I said was going to happen.
Yeah, you chose
Now we
those
need to
options.
go this route, and you know, so it's like
I
we
heard
wanted
it.
the swimming pool as well as the.
Yeah, I heard a funny analogy from one of my hiring managers yesterday. He said, it's the teacher's job to plan the field trip and make sure it's fun and make sure the kids are prepared and engaged. It's the kid's job to follow the rules and do what the teacher says and to get the most out of the field trip. I'm here to drive them on that bus.
Yeah.
I'm the project manager that's driving the kid. It wasn't my idea. I don't care where I take them, right? I'm going to get them there. I'm going to get them there safely. I'm going to get them home safely. I'm going to do what they ask me to do. I'm going to do it efficiently. I'm going to take the best route there. I'm going to make sure everybody's safe, the organization's safe, all those things. But at the end of the day, it's the teacher's job or the stakeholder's job to tell me where we're going, and all of the people in there to execute and follow the rules that they've established as a team. And I'm just here to drive them. And I was like,
Mic drop.
that's kind of a cool, like, I was like, I never really thought about it like that, but that's what got me actually kind of thinking about separating that personally and professionally. If you did all of the things that you need to do to get the kids to the museum safely, whether or not the teacher told the museum they were coming or paid the bill beforehand, or if the kids decided to have fun or forgot their lunches, like, at the end of the day, I mean, that's kind of not on you, right? Like, you're just there to make sure they get there.
Yeah.
And if they don't do their stuff before and after, now granted, I mean, it's obviously a simplified analogy and from a, you know, what you're trying to do in your career and how you solve problems and how it goes into your promotional capabilities. So you don't want to completely hands off that, but it was just kind of a funny analogy to think about it, that I was like, never really thought about that before.
I think that, like, and I know that I do, you know, whatever job I'm in, you know, I take it personal. And so that's really what the discussion's a lot about, is like separating that if the project is a failure, that doesn't mean you're a failure, you know, that type of deal. And you've done the best that you can. But one of the things I learned, which is stuff we already hit on, is like, cover your butt, which means document everything, you know, as far as what you've suggested or what have you. And, you know, so I got to the point of when I was doing something like, did I do the necessary steps, even if it wasn't quite what we thought it was going to be at that tail end? And did I document it to say, hey, I did this, this, and this? And then I could be okay with the fact that I wasn't really happy that it wasn't a successful deal. But I was happy with the fact of the way I performed the job, you know, and went through and, like I said, documented everything. And the other thing is, it's hard, is part of it's acceptance. It's accepting that, you know, basically it's on them if they want to push that date and say, hey, we have to go live here, when you know really that's the wrong decision, you know. It's the acceptance of this is the way it is, this is what they want, you know, type deal. And then it's where you have to go, okay, I just got to back off and be okay with the fact that that's what they want to do. And that's a little hard too, because you get so wrapped up in, I did this, or this is my project, like you said, and I guess, you know, I haven't done any of these, but just the projects that I have worked on is like, I do take ownership of it. Like, this is my baby, you know? And so maybe in a couple of years I'll be like, it's okay.
I don't know if you'll ever get there. Like, I don't think you ever get there, because you're all really good at what you do. And I think that there's always a piece of like that and the passion that you have for your career. But at the same time, sometimes that's one of the things that I often see, especially with contractors, like, or consultants, that I'm responsible for getting their feedback and passing that along to the manager, and the manager the feedback to them, right, as we're helping in that transition. At some point having to call time out with either the manager or the PM and just saying like, hey, this is not a reflection of their work and their value. This is a reflection of how this is being handled, and can we fix that piece to maybe have a better project outcome. So I just get a unique perspective of it, because especially when you're in a contract role and there's a lot of ambiguity about what does this mean for my future? Am I going to have a job? This is a 6-month contract. How is this all going to work? And those types of things. And so staying very engaged with both parties is so critical. And that scenario, it's a little bit different than being, now it's also a little bit easier to say, I am out of here in 6 months. I don't care what these people do, right? Like, but there is a flip side of like, hey, if I really want to work here long term or try to get hired in, is this going to negatively impact? But I've had people who had very grossly unsuccessful projects, but by the way that they handled themselves and handled that project, were able to get themselves jobs within the organization. And then people who did a phenomenal job, but they were just there because they needed help with this one project, and then they're on to something else. So, you know, that's kind of, I think, a unique scenario with contract work versus being a permanent employee there.
Almost makes me think when you talk about that, like building a house in a sense. They're going to own the house at the end, and you got builders working, and they want, you know, I want to work on this, this, and this. And you're kind of that project manager almost essentially between the builder and the owner of that house. But at the end, 6 months later, you walk away. So.
But I wonder what you said with the analogy and, you know, kind of combined with yours, that you care about it. So if you were the bus driver, you would probably have to have a backup plan on what if you get a flat tire? What if, you know, the route is closed? What if the museum hours change and the teacher didn't check on that? As a project manager, the driver, you would have to kind of have a contingency plan, what you're going to do about it. If somebody forgets the lunch, you have a backup already in your backpack saying, okay, I either have $2 for each one of them, or maybe I'll remind the teacher to have the $2 for each one of them, or maybe remind the teacher to pack extra lunch, because there will be kids that forget their lunch. So as a project manager, by caring, you do all the backup stuff just in case that could happen.
Or
Isn't
help
that
your
your
stakeholder through it. Help,
Yes.
to your point, help the teacher, hey, did we think about X, Y, and Z?
Isn't it your risk register?
Yeah,
Exactly.
right, like,
Yeah.
yes,
Go wrong,
yeah.
how we're going to potentially handle them. Yeah.
One tool that I just kind of thought of that might help with like the being prepared to make the statement is like whenever I have to go to like in the healthcare industry, we use SBARs a lot. I don't know if people are familiar with like situation, background, assessment, recommendations. It's kind of a format you go through to make a recommendation for a decision to be made. And I find in situations where you're at the forgiveness point, I can get through the first two. This is a situation, this is how we got here. I don't really have an assessment of like what to do, and I don't have a recommendation. That's why I'm coming to you. And, so that tool I've found has kind of helped me self-assess where I'm at, but then also at least I can send that and ask the question. And a lot of times, if you have a good sponsor, they'll jump in and be like, "Oh, well, I can take this."
So how often do you do that assessment, or do you use the tool like on every
Anytime
milestone?
I'm at the point where in my mind I can go, I need a decision. So it may just be in an email and it's a couple sentences, but I'm like, am I capturing these major areas in my message? That helps kind of frame it. And then for like higher level, like I'm going to the steering committee, I might actually format it in that, you know, headers of this is the situation, this is the background.
Do you transition that into a decision log at that point, or once you get a decision made, or do you keep it in the SBAR format?
I kind of both. So we usually we call it a RAID log, so it's risks, assumptions,
All in one.
issues, and decisions. Yeah, and then I'll put a line in about the decision that was made once I make it, and I link it to a PDF copy of the SBAR
that's cool.
document.
Very
and
cool.
That kind of sits in the document repository. So then you can see that long term, like you can go back and say, oh, this is when we had the discussion, these are the people that made the decision.
So we have a RAID log also, but we always can, so we'll have a meeting where we'll make a decision, but then we'll like email the decision maker and ask them to reply to confirm that the decision, then we attach the email to our RAID log, so that we're like, see, it's date and time stamped, and this guy made this decision. So
I do that with some of the email ones too, where you get the email approvals. Like, here's the approvals in PDF.
Cool.
I'll see it.
Yep.
I'm really
I think
I'm
we're
gonna steal
out of
that.
time. Yes.
Yeah, we have 3 minutes, but any other final thoughts here before we wrap up?
It's interesting.
Maybe you can capture our social media about the plan, like SPR.
S-bar.
S-bar?
Yeah.
Yeah, because that would be good.
Yeah.
It's like a nursing clinical thing I think they
Yeah.
do when they're doing like handoffs for patients.
Yep.
I feel like you
Very
did a
cool.
lot of different things that
Yeah.
you're doing, so I'm gonna steal that.
Yeah, that's cool.
But all right, thank you everybody.